When I was coming in earlier, I was standing at the door, and someone had come in from New York tonight. And when they heard that Cantor Addie was going to be here, they said, well, I have to come because it's like her voice is from on high like an angel. It's very true. It's one of the more magical parts of having the honor of being a rabbi with the Cantor, because there's this amazing moment. Then there's also moments sometimes early in the morning on a Saturday before anyone gets here, and walk into the room and Piva's here and it's quiet and there's Cantor Addie. And one of those mornings was October 7th. And right before I got here, I woke up, I see my phone and all the clergy are texting. I'm like, why are they texting on Shabbat? And then I find out why they're texting on October 7th. And everyone's jumping into action of what they need to do. And I came straight to the synagogue, and it was just Cantor Addie here in the room. And when I saw her, there was this sadness and this grief on her face. And we spoke about the pure evil that we saw that day. And the Cantor, talking about coming from on high, said something so unbelievably prescient in that moment. She took a pause, and she said, it's going to get really complicated. And it's going to get really, really messy. Now, what Hamas did on October 7th, it was pure evil. The anti-Semites that you saw come out protesting against Israel on October 7th and October 8th, that is exactly what they were. They were pure anti-Semites. Because the thing about those very first few days was that it wasn't very complicated. It was actually black and white. It was this black and white moment in time, but life and the world that we live in is rarely binary. And since the world is rarely binary, Judaism is rarely binary. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, he writes about this week's Parshat Tzav, that Judaism, it's less of a philosophical system than a field of tensions. You find the tension in our liturgy with the multiple versions of Emanu that we do, that it plays between universalism and particularism. There's a tension between the priests and the prophets. And one of the great tensions found in our tradition is looking at the sacrificial system, found in this week's Parsha, Tzav. Now, Tzav, it comes from the same root as mitzvah, which is command. It's a commandment. So when we read about sacrifice this week, it's unavoidable. This is not a suggestion you should sacrifice. It is a command. This week, we are commanded to make sacrifices. And sacrifices, they are profoundly spiritual acts. What they're about is how a person takes what they have generated with their time in this universe, and then they offer it up to something much greater than themselves. So if we think about during the time of the temple when we live in an agrarian society, when we're all a bunch of farmers, we are growing grain and animals. So when they go to the temple and they make that offering, it's a representation of what they have done with their time in the universe. Now today, we don't farm, we work for dollars. So when we donate tzedakah and we make gifts, those dollars are now representative of how we have spent our time in the universe. Now, if we lived in a binary world, all one would have to do is just give tzedakah gifts or sacrifices like found in this week's Parsha. No tension at all. But that's not reality, and that is not Judaism. Because then along come our prophets. We have Amos and Hosea and Isaiah and Jeremiah, and especially Micah. And we find in Micah chapter 6 that Micah says, do you really think that God cares about what you bring to sacrifice? He says, quote, what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Now, it's not a contradiction. Sacrifice and walking humbly with God are in tension because both are true. According to Rabbi Sachs, what the prophets were saying is that Judaism is a monotheism, not a dualism. There is one world, not two. Now, if you live in a world of dualism, it means you just sacrifice, but you don't care about your fellow humans. We don't compartmentalize. We live in one world with one God. We sit in tension, and we sit in complexity. In Judaism, it tries to teach us how to live in this reality where we're able to hold multiple truths, especially when it's complex and counter to our human instincts. This is the complete inverse of duality, the state of having two different or opposite parts or elements. And this tension and this way of thinking, it is all over our tradition to teach us to expand our thinking and to hold nuance in our thinking. Think about Passover. The Seder, it begins talking about death and murder and slavery. And then it moves to plagues. Then it slowly moves to Elijah, the harbinger right before the Messiah arrives. And then at the very end of the service, we say, next year in Jerusalem. Next year, may there be freedom, not just for us, but for the entire world. We travel from death and slavery to life and freedom for everybody, all within a single night. It is one idea held together in tension because through darkness and holding all of the truths that this story has to offer, we're then able to squeeze it into fine light. We are pushed this way time and again because our natural inclination as humans is to live in duality. We like being in a camp. We're either Republicans or we are Democrats. We are left or we're right. We either support Israel or we support Palestine. Judaism does not want us to live in this place, even though we are naturally drawn to it. Judaism wants us to hold multiple truths and to stay within the tension. That is what Cantor Addy was referring to that morning. That morning, it was one of those very rare and few mornings in the world when the world was a duality. But as time has gone on, holding all of the truths together, it's complicated, it's painful, and ultimately it's true. That's what a lot of us are struggling with right now. That our minds are taxed by holding on to all of these truths. The truth that Hamas should be eliminated. The truth that innocent Gazans should be protected, and that seeing the starvation happening in that region, it goes against everything that we stand for when seeing others as part of the divine. And the truth that the divine includes those Israelis that are held hostage by the terrorist organization Hamas. And the truth that they are being held hostage in the tunnels below the starving Gazans, intentionally. And when you see those images, it should rip your heart out. Now, this isn't even mentioning the complexity within Israel itself. The complexity that the current government allowed funds from Qatar to support Hamas and the tunnel building for years. The complexity that just 6 months ago, those on the right and the left, they were protesting against each other, and now they're standing together, unified in serving their own country. And now the right and the left that used to be opposed are now standing together, opposed to the ultra-Orthodox who will not serve their country. To say that any of this is simple, and there's only one way to understand it, is false. Tension is our foundation, because within it is often found truth. When we go to Israel on May 11th through 18th, and I really hope you join us, we're going to go there together as a community, and we're going to stand together during one of the greatest tensions and most sacred moment that occurs in Israel every single year. The tension is found within Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. Yom HaZikaron is Memorial Day, and it is radically different than how we do Memorial Day here. There are no mattress sales in Israel. On Yom HaZikaron, there is pain, and there is sadness, and there's deep grief over who has been lost in serving Israel. Parents, they weep. And this year, the pain and the sadness, it's going to be more acute than almost any time, at least since the 1970s. And then at 11 a.m. on May 13th, a siren goes off in Israel. And it does it every single year on that day at 11 a.m. And everyone in the country stops. Every single car on the highway comes to a stop. People get out of their cars, and they stand in silence for 2 minutes. Every single intersection stops and stands in silence. Every grocery store stands in silence. Every classroom stands in silence. And the intensity is beyond anything I have ever experienced. And then the radio and the TV are mournful all day long, right until the sun sets. And at that moment, the nation transitions into Yom HaAtzmaut, Independence Day, where the complete opposite occurs. A celebration beyond anything. There are people dancing in those streets that were silent just a few hours before. There are fireworks that are launched into the sky, and the entire country, it breaks out into a celebration for what they do have. Now, these two holidays, they're seemingly on opposite ends of the spectrum, but they're touching each other, and they embrace each other. Because without the darkness and the loss, there would be no freedom and there would be no celebration. The nation of Israel, they know how to celebrate because they hold the tension of two truths. I imagine this year that tension will be more palpable and intense than at any other moment in many of our lifetimes. We're going to Israel to be a part of that story, to be a part of the tension, to hold all of the truths. As it's written in Psalm 125, those who sow in tears will reap in joy. Because it's only when you hold the entire truth can you actually come to a place of joy. This is our challenge. This is our tradition, to stand in a place of tension, to hold multiple truths. And when we see ourselves and others who push for a world of duality, is that we're not supposed to reject them. Because the moment that they are wrong and you are right, that is duality in and of itself. Rashi comments on the opening line of this week's parsha that sav, to command, it should be understood as urging us on to carry out a command, and that it comes into force at once, and it's binding to every single future generation. Our tsav, our command, is to walk with others, to walk with ourselves, and to be open to the vast array of truths that exists within the tension of this singular world that we find ourselves in. On this Shabbat, may each of us find ourselves commanded to sit within the tension of truth. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.